Uttara. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys. Uttara. Reborn in this Buddha age at Sāketa, in a Brahmin's family, he was named Uttara. Convinced by the twin miracle at the Kadamba tree at Savatthī, where some business had taken him, he was induced to leave the world when the Lord, at Sāketa, preached the Kalaka Park discourse. Going with the Lord to Rājagaha, he there developed insight and acquired sixfold abhiññā. Returning again to Sāvatthī to wait on the Buddha, the bhikkhus asked him, "What, monk, have you already accomplished your religious duties?" He, declaring Anna, replied in these verses, "Well do I understand the factors 5. And well is craving rooted out in me. Developed are the 7 wisdom chords. And all the poison fumes are shrunk to nothing. And since the factors now are understood, I, look you, throwing out the huntress fell, who sets her netted trap for every thought, and cultivating wisdom's harmony, sane and immune, in peace shall pass away." Thera. Badaji. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys. Badaji. Reborn in this Buddha age at Badia. As the only child of a counselor, whose fortune was worth 80 crores, he was named Badaji, and was brought up in luxury, like that attending the Bodhisat in his last rebirth. Opening parenthesis. The commentary then relates the story of his sudden realization of arahantship while listening for the first time to the Buddha, the latter having come from Savatthī purposely to seek him out. Together with his following the Lord and his company, the week after, to Khuddhaka, and retiring to the bank of the Ganges to become absorbed in jhana. From there he emerges only when the Lord came by, not heeding the preceding chief Theras. To vindicate his new supreme attainments, the Buddha invites him onto his own ferry boat, and remains him work a wonder. Badaji upon that raises the submerged palace he lived in when he was King Panada, all being told in the Mahapanada Jataka, e. No. Closing parenthesis. Then the Thera described the golden mansion in which he had once lived, speaking of himself, that self having passed away, as of another. Panada was that king by name, whose palace was of gold. 16 apartments deep it stood, up high 1,000-fold. 1,000 steps it rose on high, its walls with scroll-work dressed, with many a flaunting banner hung, with emeralds glittering bright. It was there they danced, Gandharvas danced, 6,000 in 7 bands. Thera. Sāketa. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys. Sāketa. Reborn in this Buddha age at Savatthī, in a Brahmin's family, he was named Sāketa. And after he had heard the Lord teach, had left the world and acquired sixfold abhiññā, he practiced recollecting his former lives with such success that the Lord ranked him foremost among those who could so remember. And he, reflecting on his pre-eminence in attainment, was filled with joy, and breathed forth this saying: "A bhikkhu mindful, gifted with insight, with strenuous effort strongly set to work, have I the infinite past recalled to mind. 500 ages in a single night. O let the onsets 4 of mindfulness my study be, the 7, the 8. For I the infinite past have recalled to mind. 500 eons in a single night." Thera. Valia. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys. Valia. Reborn in this Buddha age at Vasaili, in a Brahmin's family, he was named Kanamitta. Come of age, He saw the majesty of the Buddha when the latter came to Vasali, and believing, he took orders under Mahakaccana. Dull of insight, and beginning to make effort. He was so long dependent upon the wisdom of his co-religionists that they called him Valya, saying, like ivy and such plants, that cannot grow leaning on nothing, so he cannot get on without leaning on someone who is wise. Single quote. And it came to pass that he went to hear Thera Venadatta preach, and becoming by that heedful and intelligent and ripe in knowledge, he asked the proficient teacher, saying, all that by earnest work has to be done, all that one gladly to awaken to truth must do, all that shall be my work nor shall I fail. O see my forward strides in energy, and do you show me how and where to go. The path that's founded on ambrosia, so I in silent study pondering, shall to the silence of the seers attain, as glides great Ganga's river to the main. Then Venadatta gave him an exercise for study, and he, working at it, not long after won arahantship. Declaring Anna, he uttered those same verses. Thera: Vitasoka. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. Vitasoka. Reborn in this Buddha age, in the 218th year of that, as the younger brother of King Dharmasoka, he was named Vitasoka. Come of age, he acquired the accomplishments befitting noble youths, and then as a lay pupil of Theragiridata became highly proficient in the Sutta and Abhidhamma Pitakas. Now one day when his hair was being dressed, he took the mirror from the barber's hand, and meditating on his body, saw some grey hairs. In urgency he sent down insight into his mind, and exerting himself to meditate, he became, as he there sat, a stream winner. Taking monk's orders under Giridata, he not long after won arahantship. Upon that he thus declared Anna, now let him shave me. So the barber came. From him I took the mirror and, in that, reflected, on myself I gazed arid thought. Futile for lasting is this body shown. Single quote. Thus thinking on the source that blinds our sight my spirit's darkness melted into light. Stripped are the swathing vestments utterly. Now is there no more coming back to be. Thera: Punamasa. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. Punamasa. Reborn in this Buddha age at Sāvatthī in the family of a landed proprietor, he left the world after the birth of his firstborn. And living near a village, he strove and worked till he acquired sixfold abhiññā. Going upon that to Sāvatthī and saluting the Lord, he lived in a charnel field. Now his son died, and his wife, desirous that their property, having no heirs, should not be taken over by the Rajas, went with a large following to greet her husband, and induce him to leave the religious life. But the Thera, to show his passionless state and to vindicate his attainment, stood in the air and said, all the 5 hindrances that bar the way against the safe, sure peace I put aside. The mirror of the holy path I grasped, the knowing and the seeing what we are. So I reflected on this grouped frame within and hard worked without, and I saw how, whether it was mine or not of me, the body empty is and vanity. Thera: Nandika. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. Nandika. Reborn in this Buddha age at Kampa, in an aristocrat's family, he was named Nandika. He was the younger brother of Bharata, whose story will next be told. When both were come of age, they heard that Sona Kalivisa had left the world. And saying, even Sona who is so delicate has gone forth. Now what of us? They, too, left the world. Bharata soon acquired sixfold abhiññā. But Nandika, through the strength of the corruptions, was not able to command insight, and could only practice for it. Then Bharata, wishing to help him, made him his attendant, and went forth from the vihara. Sitting down near the road, he discoursed to him of insight. Now a caravan passing by, an ox, unable to pull his cart through a boggy place, fell down. The leader had him released from the cart, and fed with grass and water. His fatigue allayed, the ox, reharnessed and strengthened, pulled the cart out of the bog. Then Bharata said, "Did you see that business, brother Nandika?" "I did. Consider its meaning." And Nandika said, "Like the refreshed ox, I, too, must draw forth myself out of the swamp of Sasara." And taking this as his subject in practicing, he won arahantship. Then to his brother he declared Anna in these verses. Even though he trip and fall, the mettled brute of noble breed will firm stand once more. Stirred yet again to effort new. Destroyed no longer, draws his load along. So look on me as one who, having learned of him, the all-enlightened one, and gained true insight, am become of noble breed, and of the very Buddha son indeed. Thera. Bharata. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. Bharata. Now when his younger brother Nandika had declared that he had gotten Anna, Bharata conceived the idea. Let us both go forthwith to the Lord, and tell him how we have carried out holiness of life. And he said these verses to Nandika. Come, Nandika, now go we unto him, whose blessed teaching taught us all we know. And in the presence of the awakened one, the chief, let's roar the lion's paean of our hearts. That quest for which the holy sage in love and great compassion made us both to go forth. That good supreme both you and I have won. And every bond that hindered us is gone. Thera. Bharadvaja. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. Bharadvaja. Reborn in this Buddha age at Rājagaha in a Brahmin's family, he came to be designated by his clan name of Bharadvaja. Living the domestic life, a son was born to him, and he named him Kanadina. When the boy was of proper age, his father said, "Come, dear boy, and study under such and such a teacher," and sent him to Takasila. On his way there he made friends with a great Thera, a disciple of the Lord, heard him teach the path, took monk's orders, and after due training won arahantship. Now his father Bharadvaja heard the Exalted One teach the path at the Bamboo Grove Vihara, and he, too, left the world and realized arahantship. But Kanadina came to salute the Lord at Rājagaha, and with joy he saw his father seated near the latter. And he asked himself, "My father, too, has gone forth. Has he, I wonder, attained the end of the religious life?" Then he discerned that his father was an arahant, and wishing to make him utter a lion roar, asked him, "Have you succeeded in attaining the end of that for which we leave the world?" Then Bharadvaja showed his attainment in these verses. It is thus the enlightened lift their triumph song. Like lions roaring in the hill ravine, heroes who in the holy war have won and conquered evil, Mara and his host. The servant of the blessed Lord I, a devotee of the path and the monk's order, and glad and gratified my heart to see my son cleaned of the poisons, sane, immune. Thera. Kanadina. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. Kanadina. Reborn in this Buddha age at Rājagaha, in a Brahmin's family, he was named Kanadina. Come of age, and impelled by the efficient cause culminating, he came to the general of the path, heard the path, believed, left the world, and developing insight, won arahantship. Upon that he thus declared Anna. Waited have I on saintly men and heard full many times the saving truths they taught. Hearing I knew I should attain the road that leads away from things that age and die. Answer in me all lust to live again. Thus being utterly thrown out, since then, in me it is no more found, nor was, nor will it ever come back in me, nor at this hour did rise in me. Thera. Migasira. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. Migasira. Reborn in this Buddha age in the family of a Brahmin of Kosala, he was named Migasira after the constellation under which he obtained birth. And having acquired Brahmin culture, he practiced the skull spell, so that, when he had muttered the spell and tapped with his nail on the skull, he would declare, "This person is reborn in such a sphere," even with respect to those who had been dead 3 years. Disliking domestic life, he became a wanderer, and through his won favor and respect. Coming to Sāvatthī and going before the Lord, he declared his power, saying, "I, Lord Gautama, can tell the destiny of dead persons." "How do you tell it?" He let a skull be brought, and, muttering his mantra and tapping with his nail, he asserted hell or some other sphere to be the place of rebirth. Then the Exalted One had the skull of a bhikkhu brought, who had attained complete outgoing, and said, "Tell now his destiny to whom this skull belonged." Migasira muttered and tapped, but saw neither the beginning nor the end. Then the Lord said, "Art not able, wanderer?" He replied, "I must first make sure," and turning the skull round never so much, for how should he know the goings of an arahant? Stood ashamed, perspiring, dumb. "Art tired, wanderer?" "Yes, I am tired. I cannot discern the destiny of this one. Do you make it known?" "I know it, and more besides. He is gone to Nibbana." Then said the wanderer, "Give me this hidden wisdom. Then do you take monk's orders." So Migasira was initiated into monkhood, and was given exercises in calm. Well grounded in jhana and abhiññā, he practiced insight, and not long after won arahantship. He then declared Anna thus: "Since I went forth and entered on the rule, initiated into monkhood by the Enlightened One Supreme, emancipated as I went, I rose, transcending all these things of sense desire. While he, that very Brahmin, looked on me, oh then my heart was set at liberty. Yes, since all bonds are broke for forever. For me emancipation, is fixed and sure." Thera. Sāvaka. Adapted from the Archaic translation by Mrs. Rhys Davids. Sāvaka. Reborn in this Buddha age at Rājagaha in a Brahmin's family, he was named Sāvaka. And when he had acquired a complete education, he followed his inclination to leave the world. Coming as a wanderer to hear